So you can see here, when you pull up the library, and you download it from our website, you'll see actually um, uh, you'll actually see three different directories in it. And those three directories, there's an intraoral directory, a desktop directory, and a healing caps directory. So we do have three different libraries that are available to for OptiSplint. And the reason why we separated them into the different libraries is because we wanted to make sure people understood, or we want to have different kinds of options for different kinds of scanning and different kinds of accuracy levels of the record, right? So there are kind of two types of records that you can get from OptiSplint, maybe even three, but the two main types are one with an intraoral scanner, which isn't quite as accurate as a desktop scanner, right? Intraoral scanning, even when done outside the mouth, those scanners are rated at best 20 microns to 30 microns, and on the lower end, maybe 40 to 50 microns of accuracy. There's still always going to be a little bit of that human factor that prevents those scans from being super accurate. And so we created an intraoral library just to make sure that you have options in there that account for uh, that that greater variance, right? The desktop library is really for situations when you're scanning the OptiSplint with high precision scanners. So if you're doing once you've taken the OptiSplint, glued it together in the mouth, and taken it out of the patient, and actually put it into a desktop scanner that has 4 to 10 microns of accuracy, that's when we recommend using the desktop scanner, the desktop library, and I'll tell you a little bit more about why we do that. The last library directory that we have here is the healing caps. This is a little bit outside the scope of what we're going to be going over today, but basically and I'll show you the different options here. But basically, it gives you the ability to convert the OptiSplint scan body file into a healing cap that would be in the same exact position as the healing caps in the mouth. So if you scan something other than the scan caps, the multi-unit scan caps in our kits, maybe like a BioHorizon scan cap or something like that. So you could see, let me show you really quick the options that are in there. Oh, actually, they're not in this one. I apologize, but I'll show you those later. I thought they would be in here. I apologize. But there are different options. So we have like Nobel, Strawman, Neodent, and BioHorizons. And so we have all these different healing caps that you can convert the OptiSplint scan body into. And it would give you the ability to kind of align those healing caps to the tissue and use those healing caps as a way to align your OptiSplint over to the tissue so that uh, you can use healing caps instead of our MUAs instead. It's a little bit outside the scope of what we're doing, but I did want to show you that we do have that available to you if you want it. So what I first wanted to go over basically is our intraoral scanning library. And so in our intraoral scanning library, what is different about it is basically the the fact that we have all of our direct to MUA options here. And we have for direct to MUA, we have the desk screw available. We have the Rosen screw. We have the Abernine Powerball, and then we have the Straumann SRA. So when you actually look at this, um, you can actually see the connection geometry that you would be pulling in to to Exocad when you're actually using this library. And you could see with the desk screw, they have this really nice tall screw area that would give you a little bit more retention in that print. And because that 19018 screw is a little bit longer, or some people like to say it's the Astor Uni abutment screw, either one. But having a longer screw like that just gives you a little bit more retention on that printed prosthesis for a little bit more um, uh, I guess a strength on that prosthesis. Now with Straumann, because we want people to be able to utilize the desk screw for Straumann SRA abutments as well. And In order to do that, because the Strawman SRA abutments are a little bit lower in terms of where the screw threads is able to engage, we actually created, and you could see it when I click on it, we actually created it so that we made that screw seat a little bit lower than the OEM one. You can see that there, right? And so that allows that desk screw to actually engage the SRA abutment um, uh, for any kind of Strawman case that you're doing when you want to print directly to the MUA. Now we've also added these direct to MUA M1.6 options as well. These are basically screws that are available to right now that we know of that are available to M1.6 type MUAs. For example, the MIS MUA is a M1.6 thread screw, which means the diameter of the thread is actually 1.6 millimeters. And right now, as far as we know, they do have their standard prosthetic screw, which again, you could see just how low that seat is. So you do have to be a little bit careful when you're printing this. The 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 thickness of that screw seat is really small. But your alternative is also the Rosen screw. The Rosen screw does have a M1.6 option, is one of the few out there that does make an M1.6 screw um, uh, for these types of cases. And of course, we've also included the ever popular Vortex screw as well, um, made by Louisiana Dental Implants. Danny Domingue, they really came up with a really great idea here. What I love about theirs is you could actually adjust the screw seat to the different heights based on what you need. So even they are kind of make it available to um, uh, basically like any kind of Straumann restoration. So if you do need to kind of lower the screw seat to be able to engage the vortex screw on that Straumann restoration, you can. And they also have a tie base as well that you can use on theirs as well. Now, clicking off of these direct to MUA options, what the difference between our this library and the direct and the desktop library is the cement gap that you're getting with these tie bases. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure of is that when you are scanning, let's say intraorally, or you're taking the OPTISPLINT, you're using an intraoral scanner to scan it outside the mouth, because of the inherent error that exists in that kind of situation, we did try to create a larger cement gap for tie bases so that you can cement them on a model. So basically, if you're, during the time that you're printing, and it's an immediate case during the time that you're printing, you might pour a stone model. You might use that stone model to cement tie bases after your print, or you might use that stone model to use it to screw on the direct to MUA printed prosthesis that's been cleaned but not cured yet, and actually cure it on the model. That's going to give you a lot better accuracy in terms of, or ensuring the accuracy of your prosthesis fit onto the implants by being able to cement tie bases. Now, because there's a little bit more error in those situations, we created these libraries specifically for that situation to have larger cement gaps. So all of these tie base options that you see here, the BioHorizons one, the Strawman SRA abutment, they all have a slightly larger cement gap than the one that you're going to see in the desktop scan library. And that's kind of what we did here with this intraoral scanner library. Okay. Now, I want to show you our desktop library. And once you understand our intraoral library, the desktop library is very, very simple. Basically, all of these different options that you see here for the desktop library are basically just OEM options that you have for these different tie bases or direct to implant restorations. So again, now it looks identical basically to the one we saw earlier. But this actually has a much smaller cement gap. It's going to have about a 30 to 40 micron cement gap for you because it's made for a final, right? It's made with a desktop scanner. So you're going to have a much better, much more precise fit with these tie bases onto when you're trying to cement them into like a zirconia final restoration. But yeah, you're going to be using a a these libraries when you're doing a desktop scan, the OptiSplint, because that's going to give you a much more accurate scan. And that's true for all of these. But what we also included in these is the direct to MUA bar options as well. So we have that for the Straumann SRA. We have that for Nobel Biocare. I'll show you that one. And you can see the really small cement gap there. Or sorry, the really small screw seat, because we're assuming that you're going to be using um, your, uh, a bar to actually do this. And I think we have it for Norris as well. They're the one that they've created. And I believe we also have the one that Desk created as well for their direct to MUA scan. Or direct to MUA bar kind of restoration in their library. So we actually pulled all of these libraries. These are OEM libraries. We pulled them directly from the manufacturers, and we made sure that we didn't touch these at all. It was the ones that we created for the intraoral scanner that we created a larger cement gap for, just to account for any error that might be that might happen just because you're using an intraoral scanner. Um, at this point, we're going through the final workflow. And the assumption is you already have a temporary in the patient's mouth. They're healed. They're ready for their final, and we're trying to get the records that we need in order to go from that temporary that we printed or converted or whatever it is, and we want to go from that to a final, right? And so we always start with the records. And the first record that we need is a scan of the prosthesis. And so this is a double arch. And so we're going to be scanning these intraorally first, and then we're going to be scanning them extraorally with these scan caps. So we use the intraoral scan in order to capture the bite. So these are going to be in the patient when they sit in the chair. The first thing we want to do is we want to scan it upper and lower, and then we want to scan the bite so we get a nice bite with the patient. And then we're going to remove both of them, and this is what we're going to end up with. We're going to put those analog scan caps into the analog positions of the prosthesis, and then we're going to scan it extraorally outside the mouth. And then we're going to, you could either do it where you're not finishing the scans prior to removing them and then finishing each one of the upper and lower scans with the analog scan caps separately, or you can just do an extra set of scans with the prosthesis with the scan caps in place. And so once you have all the scan caps in place, this is what you end up with. On the upper, you'll even notice that we have one scan cap missing. You really actually only need 3 scan caps in order to get a good alignment. But having one for every single implant position is of course ideal. But we wanted to show you that it works either way. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect scans of everything in the scan caps. You can see there's some imperfections in them. These are basically to capture the bite and relate it back to the digital implant locations of the that we capture with OptiSplint. Now, at this point, we also want to capture the tissue, right? So you could do it one of two ways. In this situation, we actually did it with our multi-unit scan caps. We put our multi-unit scan caps onto the tissue after we removed the prosthesis from the mouth. And then we just scan those multi-unit scan caps with the tissue around it to capture as much of that tissue as possible so that we can get a really nice clean scan of the tissue. And that was the upper, this is the lower. And we want to capture both the upper and the lower in these situations. And you could see, I mean, even with the lower scan with these scan caps, we're able to get a pretty good scan of the tissue with these newer uh, scanners. I believe this was a uh, a Dentsply Prime scan that we used here. And then also, of course, we want to capture the OptiSplint scan or a scan of the OptiSplint. We always recommend that, let's say if you're a lab and you're working with a doctor, we always recommend when you're doing this process to have the doctor scan the OptiSplint on a scan plate, um, with prior to shipping the OptiSplint jig to you. This is to ensure if for any reason the OptiSplint jig breaks or fractures or there's some issue or bends on the way to you at the lab, that you still have some record that you can use to create a try-in with. And then you could always get that splint or the jig back to the doctor in order to have them re-lute it together. But we always recommend doing an integral scan of it, on a scan plate would be ideal. In this case, scanned, we also put the scan caps, the analog scan caps, onto the OptiSplint jig before we scanned it as well, just to capture the scan caps so it makes it even easier to align. The other thing that you can do is in our library, and you may have noticed earlier when I was showing you our library, the analogs in our library are actually the same geometry as these scan caps. And so you could actually pull in these scan caps, the, um, even if you don't have the doctor or you scan the OptiSplint with these scan caps in place on the OptiSplint. But both work, but this is just another way to do it. So moving on to once you received uh, the the records into your lab and you're ready to start your Exocad workflow. Um, here we're setting up the case. And what I want to kind of mention right here is as we go, is we're going to be selecting, sorry, anatomic wax up. We're going to be selecting the 3D print, and we're going to be selecting the scan body scan for that, for any implant positions. So we're doing the implant positions first. In this case, we actually are, I'm going to pause it. I'm going to pause it right there. I can. Um, I'm going to pause it right after this. You're setting it with a scan body scan. And then in this case, we're actually doing, we're not designing the wax up because, um, we're just showing you the alignments of the wax up. Normally, in this situation, when you're getting these records from the doctor, you're actually doing a design. So you're going to be aligning the implant positions and all that stuff prior to bringing in your different teeth and all that stuff to actually do your smile design. That's outside the scope of today as well. So normally you would be doing the design digitally or wax up, just so that you could actually create your own design from the records that you're getting from the doctor. In this case, we're just showing you the alignment and that's why we're choosing, no scan it. We're going to bring in kind of almost like a immediate workflow, our pre-designed wax set that we had created already just for this example. Um, but you're going to kind of hit control and you're going to click on all the different implant positions just so it makes it easy to capture the same things. And then, or to kind of enter the same things for those spaces. In the intervening spaces, you're going to just do an apoptic wax up, and you're just going to do the same kind of parameters, and then you're going to kind of hit all those right in between for all the teeth that you're going to design or what that are on your wax up. And these little dots here are basically your bridges, or basically letting them know that you're bridging them together. I'm sure you guys are all pretty familiar with Exocad if you guys are on this call. And you could do many different ways in terms of making sure that you could save it, but we always do two-stone models and inclusion. You could also do just like a scanned or whatever, or a digital bite. Of course, we'll pull this into Exocad, and then we'll just pull it in one-on-one. We always recommend labeling your files very clearly so that you know exactly what you're going to be bringing in. We're going to be bringing the tissues scans as our jaw, and then we're going to be bringing in the um, uh, OptiSplint scans as our implant positions. We're going to be bringing in the upper and lower prosthesis as well, just to make sure we have the bite. But you notice once we bring these all in that they're kind of all over the place. Right here, we're doing our best to orient the the STLs in the ideal kind of orientation so everything will align nicely. And we're just making sure that we have everything in the right positions in the right way so that it's not or just not all messed up, I guess. And then we're going to start aligning the meshes. The easiest way to align the meshes is to kind of isolate the meshes that you want to use. And so what you're going to be doing is you want to use your little menu on the top left that you see, and you want to click on and off the things that you're going to be using. So in this case, we're focusing on the, um, or I guess we're organizing first kind of the different scans that we have. So the one scan that we want to keep intact uh, is the bite that we have here. Um, and first, we're going to be working on the upper, and we're going to click off the lower arch. And so we're focusing on the upper right now. And you can see on our tissue scan, we have the MUA scan caps. On the prosthesis, we have the analog scan caps, and on OptiSplint scan, we have the OptiSplint scan bodies are going to align to the tissue scan caps, and the analog scan caps are going to align to the prosthesis with the analog scan caps. Um, or yeah, the OptiSplint is going to align directly to the MUA scan caps, and um, the OptiSplint or the analog scan caps are going to align to the analog scan caps on the prosthesis. And so lining them up like right next to each other is really the easiest way to ensure that you don't get confused. So kind of orienting them kind of closely and then lining them up directly to each other. So we're going to start the alignment. You always click on your floating mesh first. So the one that you're moving to the one that's going to stay in the same position. So in this case, we want our prosthesis to be staying in the same position, or the bite scan, right? To be staying in the same position. We don't want that to move because that's already aligned with the lower and the bite. We want to move the OptiSplint scan over, right? So we're using basically in this situation the analog scan caps, and we try to use kind of the bottom of the analog scan caps to try to capture the vertical basically, because that's really important. And you'll notice that that was an okay alignment, wasn't ideal. We want to try to make that alignment as ideal as possible. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going into this match excluding selected parts option here. And then we're going to start with invert markings. Now, when you see this really dark blue color, that means all of that dark blue is going to be ignored. And then we're going to paint the parts of the scan bodies or the analog scan caps that we want to say is the common data between these two different STL files. And so we're basically just painting the bottom of the analog scan caps on the OptiSplint with the bottoms of the analog scan caps on the prosthesis. And we're giving a best fit match. And it will only take into account what you see in green there for both of those STL files. So that's going to give us a much more accurate scan. And so when we click on show distance, you're going to just see much better colors around those things. Now, again, these are intraoral scans being aligned to a desktop scan of the OptiSplint. They're just not going to be super accurate, but this is kind of the best way to get as much accuracy as you can. You see the blue kind of on the bottom there, really kind of giving you that extra bit of accuracy. Now to align the multi-unit scan caps to that position is we're going to be using the kind of the posterior of the OptiSplint scan body. And you'll notice that the posterior of the OPTISPLINT scan body is basically the same shape as and the rounded part of the OPTISPLINT scan body is basically the same shape as kind of like the half of the um, multi-unit scan caps. So what we're trying to do here is we're going to try to click on the floating mesh again, which is the tissue scan, and now the OptiSplint scan is the static fixed mesh, and we're trying to click on points that are in both the analog scan cap or the multi-unit scan caps, and that are similar to the OptiSplint scan bodies. And now in this case, you can also do the match excluding parts if you want to. I think we were pretty happy with the alignment there, so we just moved on from there. But you could certainly dial in the alignment by making sure you have a really good alignment. But you could see now the upper is fully aligned. We have aligned all um, the upper arch fully now, and we're kind of ready to move on to the lower. And so now we see the lower, that's kind of all out of whack. And so we want to just kind of pull up just the different scans that we want to use to align. Again, we're going to go to manually first, just so we could start moving the different STL files around so that we can kind of put them into the similar position that we already have the byte scan in. And so this is just going to be the easiest way to kind of help you visualize everything. So it just makes it a whole lot easier to align these three STL files or these three pieces of three-dimensional data. Um, and again, we're trying to align these things into the bytes. So because we're using the byte right now, the bytes only common data with one of these two scans is the analog scan caps. We're going to align the OptiSplint jig first, and it's being done almost the exact same way that we did the upper. We're going to be clicking on the floating mesh first, and then we're going to be clicking on the fixed mesh next, and then trying to align or click on points that are already common between these 2 points. And if we can get a good uh, alignment of those, we're happy. In this case, we weren't that happy because what we're most worried about is the vertical, and you see there's a lot of purple in that vertical. We want to see as much blue as possible. So we're gonna match excluding parts again. Again, the dark blue is stuff that's going to be ignored, and anything that's painted green now is stuff that's going to be taken into account as as the the common data that is in both of these scans. And you'll notice even that some of the OptiSplint analog scan caps were missing some data on the bottom there. That's not ideal, but it's still, we're able to get a pretty good scan of everything, even in spite of that. So, but we did want to show you that we can do still great alignment even when not everything is scanned perfectly. But again, we're kind of doing that, and this time we got a little bit more blue on the bottom of those. You'll notice that we're definitely a lot more happier with this one as we move forward. Now we want to align the tissue scan to the OptiSplint, and we're going to remove the already aligned the byte already. And now the fixed mesh is the OptiSplint scan bodies, and the floating mesh is the tissue scan. And again, we're just matching the tissue scan caps that we designed to be the same shape, but just a cylindrical shape as the scan bodies so that we can kind of get that alignment. And this is a really good alignment, as you can see. And now we have both the upper and lower aligned perfectly and ideally. And at this point, we're really just kind of ready to align the implant positions and tell Exocad where those implants are, right? And so we're going to be kind of going through this part a little bit. But what we want to do first is we actually want to remove the um, the uh, the the tissue scan caps from or the MUA scan caps from the mesh file. Otherwise, it'll kind of confuse the designer or the design software. And so we want to kind of remove all these scan caps out of the mesh so that we could get a better scan of it or get a better design surface to go to work from. And so that's what we're doing. We're just editing the mesh, removing the little scan caps, removing any extraneous, unneeded stuff. We're going to be trimming the edges of them, just getting the mesh for the tissue ready for the design of the prosthesis and giving us an as ideal an intaglio surface as possible. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're going to be removing all the scan bodies, then we're just closing all the holes that are there as a result of removing those scan caps from the mesh. And we want to really kind of make sure it's as clean as possible, of course. I'm just going to let this play so you guys can see how we do that a little bit. And closing the holes, we're going to use kind of our free form to smooth and flatten those little bumps that are created once we fill those holes and remove those scan caps to get them out of the way. And so they don't interfere with the intaglio design of our prosthesis. And we want to be really careful here. We don't want to over flatten it because we want to make sure we still have the records of the tissue around it. And just make sure we have as close to what we started with as possible. And of course, remove any kind of random floating dots that might be in the mesh because any of those can also create design errors and design problems that we just don't want. Skipping ahead a little bit here. You guys can see us do the lower. It's always annoying that everything pops up at the same time when you're trying to turn on and off the different things. This just is a way to kind of delete everything all at once. And then we're just going to fill all the holes at once as well. It's a little bit more efficient and easier than the upper. Close holes to close them all. And again, we're just going to smooth them out. Again, being careful not to go too far from where those scan caps were, so that we're not messing up the nice tissue that we've scanned. And so we could still have a very good intaglio surface on our prosthesis. So now that we've prepared our kind of jaw scan or the scan of the tissue, now we're ready to start detecting the implant positions in Exocad. You can see we've done that really nice. We might want to consider trimming the STL files a little bit more just to make them a little cleaner. We could see there's still some extra there's a little bit of extra data that isn't really needed, kind of in the just around the edges of that. So that we're going to, because you could see everything that's not right underneath the prosthesis design, just really isn't needed. So we're going to trim out the palette of the upper and the lower, just so the STL files and our design is going to be a lot cleaner when we actually do the intaglio surfaces. That's again, we're just cleaning up and trimming out all that stuff. So just a good practice in general when you're designing your prosthesis. You really want to get a really nice clean surface to work from. Ridges like these are just going to cause problems in your design, so we want to remove those as well. And these are all just things that we noticed as we were kind of doing this case. And so we thought it would be a good idea just to show you guys, um, you know, you notice we actually end up cutting out a little bit of that scan body. And the reason why we're not worried about it is because we're cutting out a piece of that scan body that isn't used for our implant alignment. So um, we didn't really worry about cutting that part of it out. But again, we're just trying to trim down our tissue scans so that this extraneous data that we have here is not going to interfere with our design. So that our design can be as clean as possible. That's what we're trying to accomplish. It's starting to look a lot better. Just get a little bit more here. And now we can go back to getting ready for to align the implant positions. Of course, we're going to pull up our library. We're going to go to the um, kind of desktop scan for finals library, because we're doing like a direct to MUA in this case. Restoration, we're doing a bar, I think we did in this case. And I want you guys to kind of notice, how our scan bodies are a little off. Um, when you're trying to align them, it's kind of going off to the right, and then even aligned to the wrong scan body in this situation. And we're having a little trouble here. And this is actually a good indication of, when you're doing your alignments and what happens when you're doing your alignments. Now, we aligned this tissue scan as the way as our jaw alignment at first, and then we move this tissue scan to the bite scan. And so now the bite scan is actually where nothing's aligned or kind of um, the I guess the scan data is not oriented to the bite scan. It was oriented to the original tissue scan. And so that's why it's kind of in unable to align these scan bodies correctly. So we had to go back and, kind of pull up the scan data orientation so that we could align it more perfectly. And now you could see when we do align it more perfectly, um, the scan bodies align really nicely to each one of the um, uh, to our library. And you could see these beautiful blue. Everything is very blue when you align it together, especially when you get um, the especially when you use it with a desktop scanner. You're just going to get a really nice alignment here to get really accurate implant positions. And you're just aligning them one by one, selecting our library. You'll see this pop up just because, the library that we're always updating our library, so we don't always find it necessary to upload our latest version of our library to Exocad to get it all verified and validated. And so that's why you kind of get that error message while you're doing that. But again, we're going to be working on an FDA version of our library so that we can actually submit it to Exocad in the future. And they'll be able to actually put it on our website, so this error message will stop popping up again. But ultimately, what we're doing here, and you could see actually, you could see the analog parts um, uh, on these popping up, and you can actually see how they're similar to our scan caps. So even if you didn't get the OptiSplint scanned with the analog scan caps, you can actually use the library here to align the analog scan caps to the bite positions. And so this is just going to go really fast at this point. And now we're really done with the alignment part, with the Exocad part of using our library with OptiSplint for a final prosthesis. I mean, we're just kind of normally at this point you would be going through your design of your wax up. and then, kind of designing your smile design, doing that whole thing. Just because right now we're showing you the um, basically the alignments and how to do the use our library and things like that. We didn't feel it was necessary really, or I guess it was outside the scope of this thing. We would want to kind of recommend a lot of different Exocad courses that with partners that we're working with to really understand how to do smile design effectively. Really, what we wanted to accomplish here today with this webinar was to basically go over how all of the data is aligned in this uh, kind of three digital workflow with Exocad, and so you guys understand once you have the records, how are we aligning all those records back to that bite? And one of the things that we've done really nicely at, at Digital Arches is we kind of thought of everything in order to facilitate those alignments to make sure they're as accurate as easy as possible. The analog scan caps and the tissue scan caps that we include in our kit are unique. They're not available in most other digital systems. And usually you have to end up scanning the tissue with the prosthesis or the temporary prosthesis in order to do those alignments. And that's just a much less accurate bite scan than, and especially for these finals, than scanning scan caps that we have. They're all rigid. You could scan them outside the mouth, and they're really easy to place. You don't have to screw them in. You just snap them in, at least on the prosthesis. Um, and so, basically, we've done that to ensure that this is as easy as possible, and just some things that are unique about our process that make it a lot better and more accurate, frankly, than even some of the fully digital workflows that are out there. So really, that's kind of what I've wanted to go over with you guys today. This is just going through a calculation, so slow computer that we did it on, so it's going to kind of take for a long time. But at the end, it basically just inserts all the uh, uh, screw holes and things like that into the prosthesis. Normally, you would be doing this maybe on a bar or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it makes it so you have everything you need for that day.